All right, Zig coming in on the top 10 of the show of Jerid O'Connell. Jerid is many things, one of which is the drummer to the band The Rousers. Sharing the scene in the heyday of the CBGB, Max's Kansas City punk scene, they played with the Ramones, Talking Heads, Blondie, Madonna, all sorts of which. But they never got their record out. And now their 1979 Sire Records recording session is being released on Left 4 Dead Records. Now, this is kind of an amazing story. The Rousers were a band until about 2020. They kept at it, man. Even though Jerid stopped playing with them, they just kept going. So this recording session, due to like internal disputes and like what may have it, it never got put out, and then it got shelved. And what thought to be a long disregarded tape was actually archived here in Cleveland at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm going to let Jerid tell that story when we get into our conversation. Now, Jerid was a really fun guy to talk with, very inspirational. There's a lot of little nuggets of wisdom I took away from this conversation, and just an upbeat, charismatic fella. So I am very happy to be sharing this conversation with you guys. I think you guys are going to get the same charismatic energy and walk away with some nuggets as well. Before we get to the conversation, if you hear anything you like, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast and any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Jerid and sharing their insight with you. If you want to hear this amazing record, you can go to leftfordeadrecords.com. They have a clear vinyl that you can buy. They also have a CD. There's some stuff on Bandcamp, so you can check it out. Yes, so anywho, this is my conversation with Jerid of The Rousers.
No, it's incredible. And I always, I went to school of visual arts, and there was a teacher there, Kevin O'Connell, and we were always talking. We never got around to teaching something called the big picture. And it's basically, the concept was the stuff you didn't learn in the lesson book that you learned in life, that if you knew, it's so many things. It's everything from finance to, deep breathing to, it's how to hold it together. This is, everything is a topic that you got better at. Dig, because as anyone will tell you, I have a lot of strong opinions about life in general. I've had a ridiculously happy, wonderful life that, it's like, but I worked hard at it. It was discipline that got me there, and it got me in a very wonderful place. So be it. So I'm always talking to the kids,
I love it. And like there is, I don't know, I think that the lesson beyond the book, you know what I mean? Like the past the class is really when it starts to kick in. And like, that's when you really need the lessons. And you're like, oh crap. Like
you do. And the path really becomes when you do the right thing. And by the right thing, I mean, you set goals and you're disciplined and you decide who you want to be in 5, 10, 15 years. And you exercise, running for me, which is the most incredible thing. But most importantly, you read, long format books by the smartest people in the world who spent, the 3 years trying to explain to you, and it takes you 6 days, and you understand what they're talking about. And reading is so important, and it's great, but what can I tell you?
Yeah, no, I think it's key to have that balance of like exercising the mind in that sense. Reading beyond like your comprehension, and like exercising the body is like definitely, there's so many benefits from doing some, even if it isn't running, hitting the elliptical or something for a little bit, going
absolutely.
up the stairs instead of the elevator, little things like that, like just that little bit of discipline, and that feeds that, like you said, the goal you set. And I totally agree with that. All those little things build up.
Yeah, so many people are saying like they're listening to the record, and the Rousers came so close to major deals. Our manager turned down an Epic deal. Seymour Stein Sire wanted to release the Rouser thing. And they were saying, imagine how different your life would have been if you gotten signed. And the rest of the Rousers like, oh man, we'd be touring Europe now. I'm going like, oh my God, thank God that didn't happen. I'm like, oh, that's my worst nightmare. Spending my whole life in the back of a van with the Rousers. Because I think somehow we would have ended up closer to the finances of the Ramones than to Blondie. I think we would have been like in the back of a van, like, you know. And I was like, I have no sympathy for like, oh, I'm like, I'm so lucky I dodged that bullet of being a rock star. Thank God Almighty.
It definitely would have been a different outcome, right? And the Ramones, man, they road dogged it for years relentlessly, you know?
They made $150 a week. We couldn't get a hit. It took them 38 years to go gold, which is only 500,000 units, which means 500,000, dollars. So it's like, oh my God. It's like that. I mean, that's probably where the Rousers would have ended up. I mean, the Blondie thing, which, she hit with Parallel Lines, and she still went broke. She had the same business manager as us, Burt Bedell, and she went broke. So yeah, it's like, oh.
It is always interesting, like the perception of success to like to the actuality of like what's in the pocket. Like it's a different, it's a different realm.
Well, I mean, I learned from our business manager how little money there was. I was sitting business managers with Burt Bedell, who had, he had Joe DiMaggio to the Talking Heads, and he's explained to me that the money, when they say, oh, they signed the Rousers for 500,000, that's really credit. It's not really like we all get $100,000 to go out and buy, something, and then it's like, okay, get $1 a unit, maybe, if we take this deal, but your record went platinum. Oh my God, it went platinum. Well, that's only like $1 million spread 5 ways. And then they tell you got to pay for the studio time at $250 an hour that you recorded the whole thing. Like Bruce Springsteen, we did The River. He was down to $30,000, man. He was a rock star. He's Bruce friggin' Springsteen. But I mean, of course, if you sell your publishing, later on, there's all those stories that everyone getting 600 million and stuff like Bruce and stuff. Your publishing was worth a lot, but not the drummer of the Rousers, my friend. It would have been a long road. It would have been a long road to this Sunday. Let me tell you something.
Well, I mean, it already has been a long road to this Sunday.
Yeah. It has been a long road to this Sunday. And it continues.
Yeah, and thank God it does. There's a lot more road to travel.
A lot more road. I sure hope so, yes.
So I wanted to start off by asking about Billy Universe and the Satellites and Step and Fetch It.
Oh, wow. My God, you've done your research, my friend. We were a high school. Rock and roll started when I was born, not because of me, of course, but in 1956. So I grew up with rock and roll as it was exploding. And of course, I didn't really pick up on the Elvis thing until years later. But, the Beatles on Ed Sullivan and everything. So we always, Tommy, the guitarist of the Rousers, we were always playing. And high school bands were, where it was at. So we always had high school bands. So those were names of bands that we had back in the day. We also had a band called the Cannibals. But we were obsessed. We were obsessed with rock and roll. It was the most important thing. It was I went to school for visual arts and photography, which was another love. But music was, it's that adrenaline rush, and you see them, and they're like gods, and Exile on Main Street comes out, all these incredible records, and then those bands. When we were in high school, one of the big turning points was we went to Bridgeport, Connecticut, which I don't know if they know out there in Ohio. It's kind of like a sketchy town in Connecticut. Well, I'm in Westport. And we saw the New York Dolls in 1973. And it just blew my mind. It was so creative. It was so good. It was the year that Dark Side of the Moon came out. All the kids were smoking pot, looking at that cover, which I thought was a ridiculous cover. I still do. It looks like Scientific America. And I listened to that stuff, which, I try not to be as opinionated in my later years as I was, but, I told everyone, I got kicked out of a party in high school for putting on Jackson 5's first record, ABC. Rita Gleason kicked me out of the party. said, you got to go. You keep taking off Dark Side of the Moon. We'll give you the Jackson 5 record, okay? But you got to leave. I said, that is the best trade, you bunch of potheads. But, so Dark Side of the Moon comes out, and we look in the record racks, and there's the New York Dolls. If you ever saw that cover, they're kind of like trans in this crazy weird look, but there's like a Schlitz beer with a straw in it. So they got a sense of humor. And then we go see them, and we're in Bridgeport on a rainy Tuesday night, and they're dressed in this crazy look. And, like some biker in the back yells some, anti-gay thing. And Sylvain, who's like 5'2", dressed up like that, goes, yeah, why don't you come down here and say that? Yeah, why don't you come down here and say that? I'm going like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. This guy's going to get killed, and he's tougher than anybody in the room. And that was a turning point for our musical taste. It was like, this is New York. Something's going on in New York in 73, and it is intense. It is so creative. It's so out there. Music up to that point was very disciplined in the sense, and we loved it. You listen to a band like Crosby, Stills, and Nash & Young, they're all trying to be good people. They had incredible harmonies. And there's Sylvain in Bridgeport, Connecticut, starting a fight dressed up like a girl with a biker. And it's like, I know what train I'm getting on, brother. I'm getting on the Dolls train. Take me to New York City.
There's definitely something more there's the deep thought stuff that kind of like is alluded to around like Pink Floyd and like kind of the music that like gives you space to kind of interpret stuff. And but I feel like a lot of it gets kind of just like rolled over with just kind of like pothead culture. You know what I mean? It just becomes like, oh, well, there was something kind of deep here, but everyone's just, like out of it. And there's like an aloofness to that, because like there is like some like, even with like reggae music, like that's deeply like political music, and it's not necessarily all let's have a good time. But
those guys are gangsters, man.
Yeah, and like
gangsters.
So like I totally I can relate to like how seeing the Dolls in this place like being confrontational and being like just like this like thriving like boost of energy, and like there's no facade to even try to like contemplate. It's just right here. I can see how that would be very like exciting and refreshing.
It was. And there's something in life, especially if you're a little quirky. I'm not saying I'm a little quirky, but perhaps I never felt part of that mainstream. But when you look at something, and it's your people, when you find your people and they just get it and they get you, and it's amazing. And that's what the New York scene did. So we would sneak out. We're in Weston, Connecticut, which is 50 miles from New York City. A suburbia, one traffic light. We tell our moms that we're going over to Billy's house, and we go to New York City, and we go to Club 82, which was a lesbian bar run by a woman named Butch. So these skinny little kids sitting in the back watching the New York Dolls on a Wednesday night while everyone else is at the game seeing Chip Jones get his 1,000th shot. And we'd be there, and they would come out, and they would just be so clever, so in your face, so wonderful. And we're hanging out with like all these crazy butch lesbians. And we're like, and we're on the Lower East Side where, let me tell you, it was seriously dangerous. Like I would never let some skinny little high school kids go there. And we'd come back, and they would be like, oh man, we at the game? No, we weren't at the game. We found our people at Club 82. And it was so good. And we just worship the Dolls. And that's why we went to school of visual arts, Billy and I, because we were coming into New York, and, we knew we had to go to art school because, our grades were obviously not getting into Yale and New Haven here. I don't think they would have taken us too seriously. But School of Visual Arts, you got to check, you get in. It's still, I think, the best art school. Rhode Island School of Design is great too. And SCAD down in wherever it is in Georgia. But it was a great art school, and we came in just to be near the rock and roll. That's in 75, I guess. Yeah, I graduated high school 74, so I probably came to New York City. And that's when it was exploding. It was exploding. It was so good.
So at that, like, so leading, did you go, I mean, you went for arts, but did you go specifically for music?
Nah, photography.
Okay.
And that was my whole career. I knew I couldn't make it as a photographer in New York City. You know, I'm not going to compete with Richard Avedon and whoever. And so I got into a special type of printing called dye transfer, which is like the best type of printing. You know, cool thing is printed for Mapplethorpe, which was really cool. So,
I was saying,
but
yeah,
he'd come in and no one knew who he was because we were just like doing like, you know, all these commercial things. Cause it was a type of print you could dye transfer, you could actually retouch by hand before computers. And Mapplethorpe would come in, and I knew at that time he was Patti Smith's boyfriend. So we did like the cover to the television record, and we did all these pictures. And then when he was dying, dye transfer was dying, and it was all Mapplethorpe's pictures of flowers, which was such a beautiful way for the most beautiful lab in the world called Tartaro Color to go out a bit. You know, time was passed in Mapplethorpe, and and there it was. But yes, I went for photography, and that was, you know, I have many passions. Rock and roll will always be right up there. But photography, and that's what I did. I had a company called Fuel Digital, which was more punk rock than CBGB's. Trust me, it was very successful. It was considered one of the best retouching studios, and it was totally out of control. So,
was it? I guess so. A couple like questions on that, like, so with like drumming and like photography, what do you see as the crossover from both fields?
well, you know, everything is taste and balance. When you mix, I love going in recording studios. I used to love it. It's all midtones, shadows, and highlights, like photography. You know, it's having an eye, having an ear. And you also, when you go to art school, you learn to critique, you know. So, you know, they say like a photographer walks down the street and he sees ice and he sees the reflection in it. A normal person walks down the street and they say, oh, it's slippery, let me walk to the left. You know, you get aware of your senses a little bit more, and that's a very good thing. You know, whether you're a chef, you get aware of your senses, meaning taste. But I loved, and the Rousers, which I did from 77 to I think 81 or something, you know, that was a creative project. And just like photography, my cameras had all gotten stolen because New York was, you know, very, very affordable. Just, you know, I had bars in my windows and I got robbed 3 times. People say, how do you have pictures of their loans? Everybody went, it's like, yeah, because everything I ever had got stolen. By 3rd time they broke into my apartment, it was like, haha, you broke in, there's nothing left. What, you got to take my 3 eggs in the fridge, dudes? But, yeah, it's all the same. It's, you know, it's light and balance and tones and stuff. And that's, you know, you apply that to critiquing is a wonderful thing. And, you know, critiquing your life, critiquing things, critiquing your emotions. You know, it's you learn that in art school because, you know, that's what I learned in it. But I was rocking nonstop from 77 when the Rousers started at CBGB's to 81.
So I think that's like definitely being able to critique and like self-analyze, especially in any creative field. If you're going to, you know, if whatever it may be, like that's the only way you can like progress. And like I think that's the only way, like like to be able to analyze what you're doing in a way that doesn't self-deprecate, but like promotes wanting to like move on and move forward and keep going. I'm here, that flopped, but I can do that better next time. Like those little things and that skill set and that frame of mind, I think it's such a quintessential muscle to build. And like that's cool that you had both these like opportunities to be doing it, music end and like in a visual end too, because like that separating those two, I think strengthens that thought process in different ways. That's really cool.
Yeah, and that's, you know, that's the value of art school in the creative mind, is you don't just wake up and go, you know, okay, I got to do this. You're very much aware of what's going on, and it's a pretty unique thing just to wake up. You know, it's like don't take that for granted. Waking up, because if you read history, there was, you know, we walk through the woods and there's all these stone walls, And I think, wow, these are farms and families, and all that's left is a stone wall. What will be left of me? And of course, it will be the Rousers, 1979 on Left for Dead Records. That's why it's out there on vinyl, because someone somewhere is going to pick up and go, ah, man, these guys are a bunch of party boys. This is excellent. I hope so. That's my stone wall. The Rousers Left for Dead record, clear vinyl, is my stone wall. That's what it is.
That's beautiful. And like, you know, it definitely is. It is having a vinyl like that, and like just having something that's capturing this history that you lived, and being able to like share it and celebrate it and have it be introduced in the way it could have been back, you know what I mean? Like, is really cool. So the kid, before getting to that, like when you moved to New York, when did the Rousers really like take off? When do you guys decide, like, because the CBGB scene at that point was probably pretty popping.
It popped in 77. And I'll tell you, we were in New York in, 73, 74, 75. The class of 75 who put out records in 76 and 77 are Television, Talking Head 77, the Ramones were 76. Now, none of these bands sold a damn thing. The Ramones sold supposedly 6,000 units. The Dolls sold 100,000. As I said, the Ramones took 38 years to go to gold. At the same time, Saturday Night Fever in 77 sold 40 million. So it wasn't a popular thing. They weren't selling, but they were getting the underground press, rock scene and everything. They were so cool that they're getting press. So everybody, including your local favorites, and my personal, one of my favorites all time, the Dead Boys, come from Ohio.
Yeah.
God, I can't tell you how much I love, how much I miss Stiff. But, everybody saw that there was a scene. So the class of 75, in 75, when you went out to the clubs, there was only like a handful of bands. It was Television. You go see Television, and you go see so-and-so and whatever. But in 77, we played audition night. We said, let's give it a shot. And we stood up, we played CBGBs. You get an audition, you call up someone audition, and they let you audition with a bunch of other bands. And we get off, figuring that's it. But Peter Crowley, who is so important to the scene because he ran Max's, booked all Max's. So bands that would play CBs, he'd sit down there and watch audition night. And even though like bands like the Cramps could not play one thing. They were terrible, but he said, oh, that's a great band. Yeah, come on, I'll book you. So when we got off stage, Peter Crowley comes up, and that's why the record's dedicated to him. He comes up and says, okay, you're going to start playing Max's. And we started playing Max's like constantly, which means you start playing, you get credibility, and you also can actually you get your chops. And so we started playing from the Rat Skeller, which was called the Rat in Boston, down the coast, down to Washington, D.C., the 930 Club, which is right next to the place where Lincoln got shot, which, of course, we had to check that out. But so you played Max's and CDs, but and then everyone started showing up, and you had to really compete. So you'd go, Pete Crowley would tell me, hey, there's a great band come from Georgia. So me and Peter's Rumba of the Flesh Tones go there one night, and there's probably like 45 people in the audience. Curtain opens, and it's the B-52s. And they're full B-52s. They're not like, oh, we're working out our shit. They were like Rock Lobster with the walkie-talkies in the hair. And Peter turns to me going like, I feel so sad. I go, what's wrong, Pete? He says, they're so much better than us. Because you had to fight. There's only so many Saturday night slots. So you had to fight. And fight we did. We made it to the menu. If you go on my Facebook page, I posted recently the menu from Max's, which had a Ramones, a Blondie, a Suicide, a Wayne County Punch, a Ascenders, and a Rousers. So we made it to the menu. But as much as you loved going to see these shows, they were also your competition, And everyone was starting a band. Like the Rouser Girlfriends started a great band called the Comatines. It's like, holy shit, the Comatines might become bigger than us. So you had to work at it. You had to compete. And the thing is, in 77, there was nothing to do in New York City. First of all, one of the reasons the scene was created was it was very cheap. Because you can't have the Cramps or the Dead Boys come and expect they're going to get jobs to pay for $5,200 a month, rent. So the top floor of what everyone here knows as the Trash and Vaudeville building, 4 St. Mark's Place, the whole top floor was with 4 of the Rousers, not me, but it was called the Rouser Clubhouse. That was only $200. So for $200, all the Rousers lived in the middle of it, on top of Trash and Vaudeville, the top floor, and that's, so, you could afford it and all these bands could afford it, but, you go down there and see the Runaways, from LA, and then you see like, oh, and of course your Dead Boys come, and they were so good. They were so good. That was the scene, man. That's when we started doing it. And there was nothing on TV. There was like Little House on the Prairie with 4 to 6 minutes of commercials. So what are you going to do? You're going to watch Little House on the Prairie? First of all, your TV was stolen. Are you going to go every single night? You're going to practice every day. And then you're going to go out. Of course, I had a full-time job, but practice every, hours every day until, the shows didn't really start till 9 o'clock, which is, of course, at my age now is like, I couldn't stay up that late, and, you go out there every single night. You just practice. There was nothing else to do. And of course, it was a cheap apartment, but, as I said, there was no computers. There was no internet. There was no television. You got stolen. Your camera got stolen. You're not going to sit around. What are you going to do? Sit around and read a book? Maybe. Or are you going to go down and see, the Talking Heads open for the Ramones and just,
I mean, come on, like with those options, why would you? I mean, and like it's easy now, like in kind of hindsight, now that the world's caught up to how great these bands are. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I get like at this point, these are just your peers and your competition in that sense. So the Comatines, I talked to Ramona. and I talked to Nick West.
Yeah, of course. Nick and Ramona.
Yeah. So they were a Rousers girlfriend band. What's the narrative there?
What's the narrative? Nick was not one of our girlfriends.
Yeah, I assume.
But Ramona worked with Tommy at Media Sound.
Okay.
Ramona worked on. She worked on, the Talking Heads with Eno. She worked with Frank Sinatra when there was no women in that field. And you spoke to Ramona, she's some sort of savant. Like she just does stuff and she still creates. If you follow Ramona Jane on Facebook, she's always having sales and creating puppet shows and creating this and that. She creates nonstop. And yeah, so her and Lynn, who was also in the Comatines, they were like, I guess they kind of got tired of going to see the boyfriends get up and play and everyone pat us on the back. So Ramona, who can do anything in life, and she really can do anything creative. There's no question. She's, don't underestimate that girlfriend. She started the Comatines, and next thing you know, they're underbilling us. I'm going like, oh, I can't wait till they freaking top bill the Rousers. It's going to get ugly here. But yeah, that's, everyone just picked up a guitar. But there's nothing else to do. Of course, she's working at Media Sound and stuff, with Tommy. And they're working on incredible projects that everyone recorded in New York at that time. The Stones were doing Some Girls, mixing with Bob Clearmountain. The Clash were up there recording, everybody at Power Station and stuff. But yeah, so she's picked up a guitar, said the Comatines came from Billy of our band. He made up that name Comatines for him. And, they went on and they were playing all the time. And I didn't really follow them, but after they, suppose they got pretty big in France and stuff, as they will tell you over and over how huge they were. But I presume that's true.
That's yeah. I remember talking with it, just like to be a kind of woman in that scene, as far as like with that engineer in that sense, like had to be a tough gig, but. It's that, I think that goes just to highlight with what you're saying with like, there's all this stuff just kind of happening around and like, I don't know. It seems like everyone has this kind of like, found their people type of like, enlightenment or like, enthusiasm about that scene at that time in particular.
It was remarkable. And, it just, you walk into CBGB's, coming from Western Connecticut, and you knew that everyone you could talk to anyone and they all had the same cultural reference points. Okay. You love the dolls. You love so-and-so. You love this. You love cartoons. You love that. You're cynical. Yeah, you're going to drink beer. Like, no one was drinking fancy drinks back then. I don't think I drank anything besides beer until I was probably 40 or something. I didn't even know what a martini or a Negroni was, but everyone, and the crazy thing, I had a company, as I said, Fuel Digital, and I sold it in 2006. So I sold it 5 o'clock in the morning, all these lawyers, everyone's yelling, finally this, and they transfer a ridiculous amount of money into my bank account. I'm a wealthy young rouser. And I'm feeling disoriented going back to the company I built. I actually love selling things after 5 years because I believe I start repeating myself. Every great idea, I work manically, insanely disciplined, never not show up. But after 5 years ago, I'm like, I don't have any more ideas. So I sold it and everyone was shocked. And that night, feeling disoriented, I went to my happy place, which was CBGB's. I said, it was like 2 months before it closed. I said, you know what? I'm just going to go to CBGB's. And lo and behold, I walk in, they made me pay. I couldn't get in free anymore. And who's playing but the Rousers? I was like, oh my God, this is my happy place, I think. So yeah, they were playing the night I sold my company. It was they're like, hey, Jay, this is for Jerid out there. It's called Party Boy. I'm like, oh my God. Beer's on me though. They're like, what's new? Yeah, well, let's just say beer's on me, okay?
That's like, it's kind of one of those things. Like I admire that ability you have to every 5 years kind of not stick into the same cycle and switch it, because that's a leap. That definitely is a scary leap to like rewrite the slate of whatever. And like I assume like at that point before you do, you have some kind of hinkling or like just a direction you can go. I assume it's not all just because as disciplined and like as you seem, and just like I feel like there was a plan in right, or do you just wipe it clean?
Well, there's always wouldn't it be cool if I had that on my resume? And I don't really mean my LinkedIn page. I mean like life experiences. And I stress myself out. Like people always like, I'm stressed out. It's like, yeah, that's when I'm growing. I do cold plunges. People are like, how do you do cold plunges? I go like, yeah, I do cold plunges. I do emotional cold plunges too. Let me tell you. So, I just find like I retired recently and everyone was like, you love the studio, love this, love that. We're all your best friends for 30 years. And I go, yeah, this is very comfortable. It's repetitive. It's the same brands. They're all wonderful people. But if you see what I've done in the last couple of years, so many different things open up. Is it my most favorite thing? My stuff I did in retirement? Some of my most favorite things are my new friends. So some of these friends at work were, 30 years we've been working retouching together. But now I'm a member of this club called the Wiseman, like YMCA. It's 500 retired guys. And Westport's just a stellar, cool town. We had Patti Smith singing Because the Night a couple months ago in our library. We gave Keith Richards a citizen. This is why I love Connecticut. This is why, and I worked out in Ohio a lot. I was out in Columbus with Victoria's Secret and Bath and Body like all the time. And those are my people. But Connecticut just recently in our library gave this like award to Keith Richards as the model citizen of Connecticut. The governor came down and I said, where else but in Connecticut would Keith get up there and take this thing for his, volunteer work? Geez, it doesn't quite ring to Paul Newman. Paul Newman lived here too. Paul Newman was a big influence on here. But so that's the world I live in now. So I think you shake it up, and it's, comfort is wonderful, and I go for comfort, but you have to also like, take a little pain for the game. It really is important. You just do it. Now, that doesn't apply to my relationships. It's not like I've been divorced 3 times. I'm still married to the same person who came to see the Rousers, who took me to the first Clash show when I said I hated everything English.
Whoa.
So,
yeah.
So she won me over on that one.
that would have done it.
Oh yeah. The only reason I went was because the Cramps were opening. We just played with the Cramps at the place in Dover, and I loved the Cramps. Yeah. She said, "Oh, the Clash are coming to the Palladium on 14th. It's their first show." I said, "Well, the Cramps are playing, so I'll go." And of course, it was the greatest show in the freaking world. The Clash, I was like, I can't believe, because the English scene was a very different scene. What they call punk is not what I call punk, and it was Malcolm McLaren giving them all these little taglines. You're all wankers, you're all posers. Tom Petty's a hippie. Like, oh, shut up, Johnny. But so when the Clash came and they were throwing their guitars like 30 or 40 feet off stage as they're playing, and they're hitting every note rock solid. And I was like, oh my God, that's that girlfriend. I said, oh man, I guess we're getting married.
She knows a thing or two.
Yeah. So with relationships, you got to work on that. That's the one thing is like, yeah, don't take the easy way out and do the divorce thing. I coach so many people at work. My wife, I'm going to get divorced. I go, first of all, you can't afford divorce. I just want to tell you something. You could afford maybe a BMW. You cannot afford a divorce. Do you have any idea of the finances? Let's just be real, So that's
important stuff to hear, though. And that's cool that, I don't know, you were able to like at least offer that advice. You know what I mean? Like, because a lot of people don't hear that or don't want to step in that type of that conversation, because you know what I mean. And I'm sure there's more of a personal relationship developed, but like that's like I to be able to have that. I agree. Like I think with those like personal relationships, it's a different type of growth. Like stress,
it's a different type of growth.
Yeah. Stress keeps the snare drum tight, so it's in tune and you can play it.
Yeah,
and it's gonna sound good no matter what song you're playing. You know what I mean? So I get that. Like I totally like find myself in situations like I don't know how to work these cameras, but I'm here to work them. Like like kind of on the fly putting stuff together like that. But like I think that is a key like line to draw. Like it doesn't like there are places where comfort in that sense and the lack of like maybe like I don't want to say growth, because there's always growth in personal relationship, but the lack of like kind of excitement sounds wrong too, but you know what I mean. But there is like what I'm trying to say. Like there is something where like it's okay that it's constant and supportive, and like the foundation is there.
Yeah, exactly, and that you keep working on. So
you got to
everything else. Everything else, you shake it up, you quit, you come up with something new. I sold my company. I started a coffee shop in Sandy Hook when I had a non-compete. I built the coffee shop on the Capozucca River, right around the corner where those horrible shootings were. That was our next door neighbor, where in the little town, those kids would come in for gelato. The teachers would come in for cappuccinos, and then some sick kid with a friggin' gun shot like 22 of them right around the corner. It's like, oh my God. But, I sold that coffee shop too. Yeah. It was gone. That's gone. And
out of like all these like different kind of ventures, like, do you, I mean, kind of going back to that same question with like kind of the through line of photography and like, and music, is there like kind of a through line you find within yourself?
Yeah. Appreciation for the miracle of life and making sure however many days I have, I'm not going to waste them with some stupid mind game of like negativity or short-sightedness. I'm always optimistic. I'm always grateful and curious. And, that's what keeps me going forward with everything, and that's what I keep doing. I keep cranking it out that way. So I have we can go on a whole podcast about me restoring native plant sanctuaries and, my running club that we're going to have a race with 5,000 people in 4 weeks. And, I'm learning piano, and I want to learn atonal piano.
Okay.
But,
all right. That's cool, man. That's cool. Like, what composer got you into atonal piano music?
First of all, I got to say, Left 4 Dead Records by the Rouser record, because Jim Reynolds will be listening to this, and he always says to me, he's like, you never mentioned the Rouser record. I said, the what? Oh, I quit that.
I got questions about how that came up too.
Okay, we'll get to that.
Yeah,
but atonal.
Let's a quick atonal departure here.
Okay, so I have this piano teacher that in the conservatory for 10 years, practiced 6 hours. Michael Crowley, he's a genius. So of course I say I got to take piano lessons. When I'm retired, this is what I'm saying. It's like I'm just doing something. I'm learning horseback riding. I just got back from Nepal. In India, I went to go to Nepal to see how they overthrew the government in 48 hours. I'm shaking it up. But I was saying to him, it's like, there's one thing that bothers me about music is it's all kind of la, 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 la. It's kind of like, I said, like, it's all good. It's good. It's good. It's good. So he started talking to me about this. We haven't really gotten there, but he's saying, listen, there's a whole other type of music that these composers, and of course he knows every date and every person, they said we don't have to compose for the masses. At some point we have to compose for composition, and there's a whole scale of 12 notes. And he started playing stuff, and I said, because I know I don't want to listen to it, but I want to play it because I really like this randomly. I said, I like random sounds organically. I don't expect anyone to like go, hey, let's put on Jerid's random 12 note version of Party Boy. But I love playing it. So he's promised me, he's giving me weirder and edgier music to play and show me how like notes that don't work together, because it just seemed interesting to me. But that's as far as I've gotten. I'm just on the very fringe of that, going like, we're going to get there. We're going to learn about like notes that don't, that no one wants me to play. But with music, there's music you love to play, and there's music that other people love more to listen to. And it's funny with the Rouser record, I love playing Bumblebee Rock. It is friggin' hammering and we're slamming. And they say, the first single, I don't even really know what a single in this day and age means, but the Rouser record has made all these independent charts for some reason. But they chose Be My Girl, which I never even thought of it. I don't even think about that when I think of the Rousers. It's actually a great pop song. I think I listen to it now. It's like, oh my God, it's so good. But it's different playing something than playing for someone, because you play Bumblebee Rock, you're like, oh, what the hell was that? But when we used to close with that at 2:00 in the morning and down at Max's, thundering and it's going incredible. But the record company was like, Be My Girl is such a pure pop, beautiful, pop song. And I say, a pop song? I do pop? I didn't know that.
But it is kind of crazy, like the mindset of like playing something and the audience receiving it. It is a different, like as well tuned as a band as you can get, right? As musicians, and trying to feed the crowd as you think you can do. There's always that thing where you're like the paranoid, right? Where like Sabbath like wrote it the day before, like the thing right. No, and to some degree, I think it is that thing when there's any lack of like thought or care, it just works, and it's like. So the atonal stuff is really interesting, like especially just learning how when you theorize it far out enough, it does work. Like,
yes, like, you're a musician. You know what I'm talking. Yeah. You know more about it than me. It's weird. It's incredible, right?
Yeah. When you're like, wait,
it's not random.
It's not. No. That's why I was like, okay, atonal. Let's dive there. But so the kind of make sure we're keeping on track with So going back to the Rousers, right? This session, like Okay. Let's get into the story of what
this is a good story. Because, you're ready. This is a good story. I'm just telling you. This is grand dude telling the grandkids. Okay, sit down. I'm going to tell you about how the Rouser record came out. Okay, kids, so sit down. So it's 45 years has passed. Now, I don't know what you have laying around, how old you are. You're not 45, but I have nothing from 45 years ago. Like, do I have a shirt, a sock? Nothing. So I start seeing, now Facebook I know is for old people. It's also for old bands. Everybody is there. The Senders, the Invaders, the Comatines, Pete Crowley, Angie Bowie's there. Everybody's there. So I start seeing that the Senders put out this beautiful record. Oh, it's splatter record, and it's two albums, and it's great liner notes, it's a double album. I go, how did Philippe pull that off, man? And then, of course I get it. It's like really cool. And then the Comatines come out, and I get it, and it's orange. And I'm like, whoa, man, look at this, these little gems. Because now the one thing to realize is there's not a lot of recorded material, because back in those days, recording time was $250 an hour. Now, that's not, you walk in Sam Phillips and you record your set, and you're out $250. You go in at 9, the clock's running, and you start setting up the drums for the drum sound. You're out $500. Yeah, I realized my rent back there was $185 a month. And I was probably making like $360 at Tartaro as a printer. So you couldn't record much, unless you got someone to put you in the studio. So this tape, so I see the Orange Comatines record. I call Ramona from the Comatines, was still a pal, of course. And I said, oh man, I got it. So good. She says, oh, Jim would really like to put out, I'm sure he'd love to put out something from the Rousers. I go, who's Jim? He says, he put out your single back in the day. There was a single we put out produced by brother Wayne Kramer, the MC5, called Party Boy. He had a record label called, Jim Reynolds had a label called Jimboco. And I said, that's Jim is still making records? Oh my God. Yeah. Left for Dead is his. And, so make a long story just slightly shorter. He contacts me and he says, what do you have? And of course, I'm like, well, we're in the studio with RCA. When we go and call it RCA, hi, this is Jerid O'Connell, the drummer of the Rousers. Do you have a closet there? But believe it or not, I'd heard that Seymour Stein, the president, owner, creator, co-creator of Sire Records, had given, when he died, and of course, Sire was the label that with, the Ramones, Madonna, Dead Boys, Talking Heads, he'd given tons of stuff to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So you can call the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they're really nice. So for all you people, my friends who make fun of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because they inducted Laura Nero before the MC5, I no longer make fun of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because they have an incredible archive. So I call them up and they say, yeah, there's a box here that says Rousers. I go, you got to be kidding me. You got it. That's 45. So they say, we can release it. I have to sign all this paperwork, because it's a valuable archival piece of rock and roll history. I'm like, yeah, there you go. Let me tell you, I'll give you $5 for that. Sneak it out the back door. They send it only to their lab. That's this place in Pennsylvania that has every tape deck in the world. It's a commercial lab, but that's all they use. They only trust this valuable Rouser archive. I was like, okay. So I get the bill as I transfer it. It was only like $400. It turns out it is a master tape, which is unbelievable, which means it has all the different tracks separately unmixed. And on the bill, it says additional charge $132 for mold removal. I'm going, oh, great. I just wasted my money. Like, what could this sound like? So I call up Ed Stasium, who, besides doing Midnight Train to Georgia, he did every Ramones record. He was either an engineer or co-producer or something. The first Talking Heads record sounds so good because that's Ed. There was a different producer, but in my book, he saved it, I'm sure. But Ed he just did Tim for the Replacements. I don't know if you go on and look up Tim for the Replacements. They have the original Tommy Ramone mix, and now they have the brand new Ed Stasium mix, and you'll hear what the greatest mixer in the world can make you sound like. And it's not overly done. He makes bands sound like perfect, true life, better than you probably ever sounded, but it doesn't sound like finessed and doubled and sampled. It's perfect. So he just did like the Chesterfield Kings, and he's always doing stuff. So I called him up and I said, "Hey, Ed, sorry to bother you. I got your name from Ramona. Do you remember a band called the Rousers?" He said, "I got their tape right here on my desk." And he had the cassette from that day. He's texted me. I said, "You do not." He texted me a picture of the Rouser cassette. He's like, "Oh yeah, I always kept that right here." So out of all the stuff he's worked on, he didn't have Midnight Train to Georgia. He had the Rouser thing. I was like, okay, this is starting to get spooky.
Yeah, wow.
So
that's insane.
He mixed.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. This is,
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So he was working on 77 and 78, the Ramones remixing, and also doing Sony Atmos, which I haven't listened to Sony Atmos yet, but he tells me it sounds like you're in CBGBs. It's so good. He was booked solid. I mean, he's also a bit expensive, but I said, I don't know if I could afford you, but he said, okay, I'm going to do Bumblebee Rock, friends and family rate. And he gave me a sick price. And then we had someone else mix, Bob Standler. Oh, I can never remember the name of this studio in Long Island. He did a masterful job mixing the rest of it. And it sounds friggin' mint perfect. It's such, first of all, I didn't know what I'd think of the Rousers like 45 years later. Like it was even worth my time. I was like, oh my God. I mean, this is not me bragging. This is me critiquing as, unaffected as I can with my involvement with it. But because I'm only the friggin' drummer. They keep saying, "Jerid, it's your band." It's like, the drummer, it's not your band. The Beatles aren't Ringo's band, okay? Let me tell you something. But the songs are so tight and clever. We're so at our peak from practicing every day for years. We just wail it. It was recorded very differently than other recordings that we'd done. They used to do a thing where you go in the studio, they set up and they get the bass and the drum sound for like 2 hours. You got $500. Then they put headphones on you and a click track in your ear. And as a live drummer who just rocks and looks at my lead guitars for cues, I totally sucked. I was like, speeding up, slowing down. They're like, "Oh man, what's wrong with your friggin' drummer?" I'm like in what you call it, in RCA studios with $1 million mix board, and I can't friggin' hold the beat because it's like, I can't connect to this. Yeah. But in the Sire studio, which is in the basement of Sire Records, it was an 8-track, meaning there was 8 inputs, a whole bunch of microphones, of course, but only 8 inputs, and you just wailed it. So when you listen to the Rousers, that's kind of, on a really good night, hopefully that's what we sounded like. Just me looking at Tommy, getting my cues, smashing it when like someone just like shakes their, head down, and I just feel it. And, the record is fast and it's hard, and then we got through, and I did the inside sleeve. I'm very proud of. It's a photograph of all our a whole bunch of clippings. When Johnny, the bass player, left to move to Texas, he said, "Hey, Jerid, I'm going to give you the Rouser archive." And I was like, "The what?" I was like, "Oh, jeez." Of course, I never even opened it because, life goes on. And then if you look at the inner sleeve, it's like all these clippings, and you'll see like Madonna underbilling us on a Tuesday night. She's third on the bill. You'll see Sid Vicious. You'll see the Dead Boys. You'll see everybody. The inner sleeve, which I'm going to actually make a poster of. I'm going to print up a poster. It just shows you like because I wanted to tell the story. I wanted to tell the story of what was going on. And when you look at the inner sleeve, you'll see the clippings. You'll see the B-52s coming in. You'll see everybody and all the bands playing these couple of clubs, and so then I guess the record was supposed to be released last week, and there was some sort of problem with the white vinyl, which is actually, I guess, the real color of vinyl. Real vinyl, black vinyl, has actually died. So I think the release date is the 30th, which is today's 26th. So I guess in 4 days, of course, it's pre-orders on Left 4 Dead Records. I say Left 4 Dead Records. Yes.
Left 4 Dead Records.
Left 4 Dead Records.
Left 4 Dead Records.
Thank you. So Jim doesn't go like, "Oh, it was a great interview. You never mentioned anybody."
No, we mentioned Left 4 Dead Records, Jim.
We mentioned it. Go to leftfordead.com and order the Rousers, the Senders, the Coma Teens, and any other band on there. But it's really cool because he's still, pushing music. And, it's like how, if you read the biography of Sam Phillips, he was this making platters and going door to door and selling records and trying to keep Sun Records open. And then this kid, comes in as Elvis friggin' Presley. And of course it explodes for him. He sells the contract for him $35,000. Like, okay, and then of course Seymour Stein, as I said before, the big record in '77 was, the disco stuff. That's when disco. So Saturday Night Live sold 40 million with the Bee Gees. Their Lone Star 6,000. So, Seymour Stein, who, had started his label with the song Hocus Pocus by Focus so many years ago, he signed the Dead Boys. He signed, Talking Heads, the Ramones, a bunch of others. And luckily he signed Madonna. Madonna, she was our next door neighbor in the music building. There's a building where all the bands were back in the day. It's still there today. If you need a rehearsal loft, you go to the music building. There's 69 studios, because the hardest thing back in the day was to find a place where you could play without having, like, our neighbor downstairs used to smash flower pots on our door. Rightfully so. On Fort St. Mark's playing. But Madonna was our next door neighbor. She had a band called The Breakfast Club. And she signed with Mark Kamens, who had been talking to us about releasing. He had a deal to do one. He was a big DJ and at Danceteria. But he was talking about signing us. We were like, I don't think he's the right guy. So Madonna, opens for us at Max's, third on the bill. You can see it on my sleeve. And I'd read an interview. She said, everybody just wanted to get a Saturday night at Max's. I wanted to be something bigger. And God bless you. But it shows. She worked. If you saw her back in the day, you'd say, yeah, she's pretty. You hear her sing? Yeah, she sings pretty good. You hear her songs? Yeah, borderline. Yeah, it's okay. But you know what? Hard work and discipline, and you keep going where all the other people are getting high. If you want to pass everybody up, that's what you do. You don't. So many of the bands just got into, you get the adrenaline rush of playing, because someone asked me, like, wow, your contemporaries, they all got into heroin and they all died, or they got totally messed up, And it's like, yeah, well, if you sit around, if you go to and play your set and your chemistry is like exploding because it's so exciting, and then you walk off, and there's nothing on TV, you're going to get high. I was going to work. I was leaving Max's at 2:00 in the morning. I was still the first person at work because I didn't mess around. But you'll see people like Patti Smith, she is still crushing. Her new biography is coming out. She's playing the Beacon. All these guys like Johnny Thunders who are like, living the party life, which is great. If you want to die at 27, like Jimi Hendrix and everybody else, yeah, that's live the party life. And you peaked, you had one moment, but Madonna is she's still working so hard at everything. And she was, and Patti Smith and even Mapplethorpe, when Mapplethorpe came in as a photographer, he only seemed like so good. I mean, not to be critical, but, we had Richard Avedon and people like that in that could really shoot. But, him and Patty wanted to be artists. They set their goal to be artists, and they put in the work. And you put in the work, and first of all, you move past everyone that's drinking. I'm not saying you can't have a beer or something. I'm talking about,
Yeah, no, I totally, like, I've never been a drinker of any sort. I don't drink, and like I find myself in that duality all the time, because you're playing in the environment. Usually it's the party induced environment, but to really like kind of make something happen, it has to be out of that kind of headset, mindset, and like it makes sense. And like I gotta imagine, like, as you're playing with these groups, and I'd imagine the longer you did it, the more you would see that mindset and that grind for certain artists, and you're seeing their improvement with it. I mean, of course, now post everything, you can see who really like stuck it through, and like Patti Smith and Madonna, and thank goodness they're doing cool, awesome shit, because we need it. But just like with some of the groups, like, I mean, just with the Cramps coming from like a place where they started as a mess, you know what I mean? Like seeing bands like that, like do you like with like any of the bands like the Dead Boys or the Cramps or like, the Talking Heads for sure, and television, I gotta imagine like watching those guys, could you see them grinding, or could you see like some of these groups more partying like and
They
kind
were
of
all so different, because when you think of punk, if you think of the English thing,
yeah.
it's totally different. People were being creative and competitive. So every band had a different story. So the Talking Heads, they came from an art school and they knew how to do the work. And I think, Chris and Tina actually live right near me, and they do a really cool thing once a year. They do CTGBs, like CBGBs, but Connecticut CBGBs. And local bands get up and play CBGB songs, and Chris and Tina are the MCs. But, he's still in the neighborhood here working hard. He does WPKN on the radio station. They're still doing the work because they're artists, and you got to do the work. You can't just show up and paint. You got to paint like 30 paintings to get anything decent. But everyone was totally different, and the Dolls fell apart, for heroin, with Johnny and everything, because they were more interested in getting high. Which, it's like, oh man, you got it all. Don't just do 2 records. Don't, because you have to get back to New York, because that's where there's heroin when you're in Florida and they quit. I worked with Kiss. Yeah. I worked with Finn Costello, who was a photographer, did Kiss Alive. Now those guys just wanted to be the Dolls, and they were just a bunch of dorky guys from Queens, right? And so I was with them in '75 for that summer when I was working for Finn, and we used to do all these photo shoots with them, because back in the day, photographers, that's how you get publicity. We would shoot pictures. I'd go print, 30 pictures and send them out to every rock magazine. Then the checks would come in, and that's how they get their publicity. So they were always trying to get us to take pictures. And Finn was very close, because he just did Kiss Alive. But those guys, they had Bill Coyne, the manager, and it was a friggin' job, because I used to sit there at the photo shoots, and they'd have the band meetings. So, there was, because no one could see them without their makeup back in the day, there was nobody else hanging out, because I'd go backstage, and there'd be nobody else there, because no one could see them without their makeup. And they're like, in their underwear with me with no makeup. But, like Bill Coyne, and that was a business. That was, we will make it, Gene Simmons, he had no money. Ace Frehley, we'd give him rides back in the car. I remember being in a meeting where they finally were going to get cars, and they were getting 240Zs, Datsun 240Zs. I remember Ace going, "Oh man, can't it just be a Corvette?" And we did Cars in the Stars in Weston, Connecticut, Peter Criss, and we rented an MG because his car was such a piece of junk. We couldn't do here's Peter Criss for Cream Magazine. It's like some junky car, But they worked. That was a job, and they worked it through. And the Dolls, if you look at the two, I would sit back and we talk about the Dolls and Kiss, and we talk about the bands we loved. And the Dolls just sat back and, being rock stars, and Kiss, dude, it's a terrible idea putting that makeup on. And, I used to bring the records home. My roommates who were the Rousers wouldn't let me play them. Like, you're not playing that crap. But they worked it, man. They worked it, and if you work it, you're gonna pass up the Dolls. Gene Simmons is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, if that's something. But he did it. It really showed you. In the different bands, there was bands that seemed very weird up front, like from your boys, the Dead Boys. Let me just tell you, Skip Baders was the nicest friggin' sweetheart guy that ever walked this planet. He was just so charismatic and sweet, and he used to come to our shows, and I'd look over, and my little brother was like 15 at the time, would sneak in, and I'd see him over just hanging with Stiv, talking rock and roll. And the Dead Boys, oh my God, they were so good. They were so good. But there was different bands with different work ethics, and the work ethics, Talking Heads had a work ethic. They still do, They still, you see what David Byrne is doing, You look at who's dead and who's alive. And yeah, I mean, sometimes it's cancer, but like they're all gone, certain bands. And it's, a lot of it was lifestyle and this and that. And they didn't get the hits because they didn't figure it out. They just did the same thing. not to be too critical of the Ramones, but, they were, they peaked in 77, I mean, they did great records after that, but.
Right. But they definitely did stick to their guns in that sense. And like,
stuck.
Yeah. But yeah, that's so fascinating. Like, I don't know, like, because also that comes down to the philosophy and definition of success, which is going to be different, depending on whoever's looking at it. But
yeah,
I really relate to your like discipline and like, because I've always found myself to be someone who works better if I have a schedule and a thing I'm working towards, like a goal I set, you know what I mean? And like ultimately like either achieve it or get close to it, or just having that goalpost and like working towards something has always been something I really resonate with. And I think it was like when I was younger, just because I couldn't do that and I wanted to do that, you know what I mean? So now I find myself doing that more often than not. Like maybe not achieving it, but setting it, like and working.
No, you don't have to achieve. That's the thing. You don't have to achieve it.
Yeah.
In fact, you shouldn't achieve it, because if you achieve it, it was too easy.
Right.
But there's a famous Yale thing, which I wish I could pull the numbers out of the hat here, but many, many years ago, they asked the graduating class who had 20-year goals. And like out of a class of, let's say, 600, maybe like 30 had 20-year goals. And then they went back when they were retired, and those 30 were worth like as much as all the others combined. Now, as you say, success is not all just dollars, but it just shows you that like planning and having that sort of forethought and discipline, as opposed to waking up and seeing what life brings you and trying to figure it out, it makes a really big difference. And it's when I had my business and it was going really good, I used to love having the kids come in from the schools that weren't from the big art schools, but the kids went to schools that didn't have money. And they'd come in. I had a pretty fancy, 18,000 square feet, friggin' rock star sort of company in New York City, Fuel Digital. And I would tell them, it's like, you got to realize something. When I was 11, my father died, and we went totally broke in Western Connecticut. We were on food stamps. And I was like, okay, this doesn't work for me. This is not my lifestyle. Okay. We always had custom houses. He was a custom homes builder because he was a builder. The whole thing, it was his own company, went under, it was a disaster. And when everybody else was out partying, people were like, oh, we're going away for the weekend. I was still working, and I was reading books, and I was trying to figure it out. And, it's like, someone asked me the other day what my IQ was. And I said, I have no idea what it is. I don't think that's really my gift. My gift is my ability to say, okay, I'm going to own a house. I'm going to own a house again. I live in Western Connecticut, which is right next to where I live now. I'm going to own a house in Westport. I'm going to accomplish these goals. And, I do that. I set these goals and I work really hard. And when everybody else, and I'm not saying I don't like have a adult beverage every now and then. At Fuel, we had Martini Fridays, which perhaps was a mistake. Let me tell you, do not make Martini Fridays. Our first procedure, when I was trying to teach these creative that procedures make a difference, I said, okay, who makes the best martini? Paul Giudice. Paul, you're writing the procedure because everyone thinks he makes the best martini. So the first procedure at Fuel Digital was how to make a martini. So don't think I'm a teetotaler that goes, whatever. Yeah, believe me, but it kind of got a little out of hand, as you can imagine. But
I mean, life is balanced too. You know what I mean? Like, so it's all right.
It's balanced,
it's all right when it gets out of hand because but that's because there is that balance of it. When it's not balanced, that's when it's problematic. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing is, and you got to say to yourself, and you know what? When you make mistakes, you got to forgive yourself because you're going to realize that no one's going to remember. I've made some pretty weird friggin' mistakes. Financially, whatever. But first of all, no one remembers them, which is one thing you learn when you get to my age. Is like no one remembers that stupid thing, or they're dead, so they we're past that chapter. Okay, but you got to take you got to take what's dealt you, what hands dealt you, and not be like, oh my God, the Rousers kicked me out of the Rousers. And as I was telling you before, it's like everyone's saying, oh man, if you guys had gotten signed, that would have been incredible. This music should have been signed. It's like a review saying Seymour's big mistake, they didn't put out the Rousers. And it's like, man, I feel like I dodged a bullet. When I left the Rousers, it was crushing because it was my best friends, and it was a very, not a good moment. But I went, and back then you couldn't check people's backgrounds, so no one knew I was a friggin' punk rocker. Yeah. So my future wife had taken me to Clash. We moved to Troy, Michigan, out your way, neck of the wood, because the best photo lab in the country had just recruited me, and I was working at the best lab, and I was the assistant manager. And if it was this day, they would have logged on and saw these Rouser pictures. But they thought of me as a guy totally in that field. I'm leaving to go to Detroit. Wayne Kramer of the Fabulous MC5 gives me John Sinclair's number of the White Panther Party, his old manager. He gives me Don Wes's number. He says, Jerid, when you go out there, you tell him Wayne sent you in Detroit. But I was going with a totally different thing. I went to the store. I said, okay, how do square managers dress? I went and got hush puppies. I cut my sideburns off. I walk in, and they all took me as, this is not bragging, but they used to call me the whiz kid. And they'd always say, we'd go out to dinner with these. I was 26 or something. And all the managers were like, they had kids my age. But they'd all take me out to dinner. And they'd all talk to my wife about like me being a genius. And my wife would come back and I was like, I do not know how you fool these people. You are definitely not a genius. And go, well, So they saw this guy, making these prints, and every time I make a print, it's like, I really wasn't that good. I still had years it's a very hard process. And I was making, the prints we were doing with Frank Totaro and for Mapplethorpe were A+. Mine were probably like C. But because they had this belief in this guy from New York who came and his whole life has been dedicated to this printing process, I had Wayne Kramer's friggin' number in my friggin' wallet, the MC5.
Yeah.
And they'd always say I remember I did a thing for this guy who had the Buick account. I did a print for him. He said, that's the most beautiful print Detroit has ever seen. No, anyone that knew it knew a few things. One, I was not a genius, and that was not the best thing. But, it was the same thing, selling a friggin' image. Like, I was selling rock and roll 3 months before, and now I'm selling this like serious business guy and trying to survive. But, that's the thing is I love that expression, fake it till you make it. Yeah. Because let me tell you something, I faked it. I created a character, and boy, Troy, Michigan, you ask them, you ever go to, out there, it's like, oh, you remember this guy, Jerid? Oh, man, yeah. He was a genius. He made the most beautiful prints. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But, part of that is believing in what you can do and doing it. And like in the most parts of corporate, whatever, it's going to be, you spend enough time critically analyzing what you've done, right? And you can deliver the thing they're looking for. And like genius or not, it's being prepared and putting in the time and effort and being able to and confident enough to be like, yeah, this is what it is. You said it was a genius. I didn't say that, but thank you. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I don't think yes, it sounds like it was luck too, but like there was a lot of effort and work you put into it to get to that point to be able to do it. So, like, I don't. Like,
well, that's the Bill Clinton quote is, "The harder I work, the luckier I get." And that's one of my. If I had a tattoo, which I don't.
Yeah.
The harder I work, the luckier I get. And that's a huge thing.
That is a solid. That's beautiful. Yeah. That's deep, man. Yeah. I think that's. I want to before leaving Michigan here. One of the biggest regrets I have with this podcast is I had a time set up to talk to Wayne Kramer. Like it was dude. It was scheduled and like approved with Margaret. I think it is. is his wife. I think it's Margaret or Michelle. I can't. But and they just they're like, we have to cancel like the day before. I was like, oh. And then I circled back so many times, and they never got back to me. But I think he was sick at that point, and like they, you know what I mean. So can you tell me about like working with Wayne? And
yeah, brother Wayne Kramer stories.
Yes.
I can tell you, I have stories about just about anybody you can think of. But brother Wayne had just gotten out of prison. We loved Wayne Kramer, the Rousers. Here's us, picked him up, and he comes to the rehearsal studio, and we say, Wayne, we got to play Human Lawnmower, man. We got to play Human Lawnmower. We loved him, and he was the sweetest friggin' guy. And we hung out with him all the time. And, you know, if you look at the videos, like Ramblin' Rose, he just put so much into the MC5 were so good. Now, they weren't like, you know, like that's the thing we talk about studios. Like sometimes you can't put it together in the studio because they're doing layers and click tracks and nonsense. So the other stuff, you can't understand why they're so great. You got to look at YouTube of them live doing Ramblin' Rose, and they're just so hard. And you got to realize at that time when they're doing that, the whole West Coast is like the mamas and the papas, you know? So here's these guys like, kick out the jams. It's like, okay. But he was so sweet, so nice. Then I read his biography, and, you know, Sam, who was either his girlfriend or his wife at the time, of course, died of an overdose. And I started reading his life, and I never saw that trouble in him because, you know, he never seemed to have problems with drugs. I mean, he had some pretty good drug stories, you know. He'd be like, used to get high with night nurse. You go to the pharmacy, you can't find drugs, get night nurse. Like, oh, man. But, you know, we always talk about rock and roll and MC5, and he was just exact. You know, when you meet some of your idols, you know, and I've met a bunch of them different ways, you know, it's just so great when it's like just wonderful and easy, and they don't seem like aloof in any way. And Wayne, we just hung out all the time. As I said, when I went to Detroit, like, yeah, Jerid, I'm going to hook you up with the right people. John Sinclair of the White Panther Party.
Yeah, that's wild, man. Did you hang out with him?
No, I didn't. Okay. I didn't make the phone calls, guys.
Okay,
you know, here I am, and these people are like, "Oh, Jerid is so serious." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not going to call John Sinclair." I was, you know, I was doing this thing, and I was work because it was very, very hard to set this thing up. I'd work like 36-hour days, and I'd actually like grow a beard from the time I came to the time I left, you know. And they would admonish me like, you have to learn to train and delegate, because it was a very one thing. But I was pushing to a level, you know, literally I'd work 36-hour days sometimes, you know, and I would just get this stuff done. So I was just trying to get up to speed and survive. I mean, the whole thing, I said, you know, what's the worst that can happen? They kick me out of Troy, Michigan. I'll survive that. But it was the top photo lab Meteor was the top photo lab in the country at the time. It was the most respected photo lab. And so it was a big deal to be, no one knew how to do this one process because they hired from within. That was their process. So an international recruiting company had found me. I flew out, and they were like, he's the guy. Like, oh man, I got to go here. I got to go to Detroit, you know, of course, you know.
That's yeah. So one more, Jerid, I really appreciate your time, man. This has been a very, I'm leaving this conversation very inspired, my friend. I mean, there's
call
stories,
anytime. Call anytime.
Well, the story is like it's dedication, and like that's. I don't know. A lot of times I've talked to people, and like it's not necessarily that. It's not when it's dedication and putting time and work into it. That's something anyone can do to whatever it is. But you know, I don't know. So like I'm like very moved by your story, and it's so cool that
thanks.
the Rock Hall like had these tapes, and that you can do what you're doing right now, because Left 4 Dead Records. Are you listening, Jim? Left 4 Dead Records. Like, I've talked with the Comatines. I've talked with the Senders, Philip from the Senders, and like some other cats from Left from Dead, and like I love what these guys are doing, and like every time it's been a very inspired and like cool, like just like it's so like stuff like that needs to exist, and it's so cool that Jim's out there archiving it and making sure it's there.
He's archiving it,
and like that's hugely important. And like,
but someone's got to buy it too.
That's true.
And people. Sorry to cut you off, but
no, you're good.
My wife's always saying to me, "How do you get involved with this? How can you get involved with this?" I get involved with everything. And I said, "If not me, who?" And so I donate to also, all sorts of things. I get involved. I always support everything, and supporting Left 4 Dead. You just go in there. You're not gonna. If you get the Sender's record and you put on "When I Die, I'd Be a Ghost" and listen to Philippe, who is now a ghost because he did die, which is very sad, but it's such a good song to be playing after he's gone. These things have to be purchased. And you just like, what is it, like $22? I don't know. It's like, just buy it, man. And be a Senders and a Rouser. There's Rouser t-shirts. You can get a Rouser t-shirt for the...
Sick. That's sick.
I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, like I would at one point I would love to talk to Jim. I would love like dive into like his whole process with like just what making his end of all this work, because like there's a dedication and a love and a story there for sure. But anyway, I was going to ask.
There's a story.
Yeah, if you talk to him,
anytime he would do it anytime.
That'd be awesome. Let's put a pin in that. We'll put a pin in that before we wrap up. One thing I wanted to ask, two. I wanted to comment on the Rock Hall because like so part of like what I do with the population I work with here, I've done a bunch of different programs with music programs with people with different abilities and such. And the Rock Hall has like this super sick program with a friend of mine who works there. They do like toddler rock, and they do like groups for like adults with different challenges, and like it's so cool. And one of the coolest things I went and saw there is they did a spiel. This radio DJ put out a book about an old venue called Le Cave in Cleveland, and like they have all these like tapes and like all these from all these folk artists, and it's in the Rock Hall's archive. And like when he put it on his presentation about the book for Le Cave, they were showing little clips and playing audio recordings because the guy who owned the Le Cave recorded everything, and it's like Gordon Lightfoot's first American performance, and like Simon Garfunkel in there,
nice.
And like they are super like they're involved with the scene here in Cleveland. My girlfriend works at the library, and the Rock Hall does stuff with them, and like they're awesome. And so I'm glad to hear like to this degree, and like that they held on to it, and you were able to get it from them and put it out at the level that you are. Because listening through it sounds amazing.
Thanks, man.
Like the files I got sound incredible, and like but anyway. So just to like kind of, maybe they didn't get the MC5 in when they needed to, or Black Sabbath when they needed to, but hey, they're holding down the fort when it comes to like archiving. Good on you, Rock Hall.
I'll give you one more inspirational thing. It's judge people by the best thing they did, not the worst. And that's the thing is, that's a very important thing, because so many people, you slip, and that's one thing, but, you judge people by, even if they were only incredible for 10 minutes, you go like, wow, that's how I judge people. So, and that's the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So like, yeah.
Well said. I mean, there's so many nuggets from this talk. But like the last thing I wanted to ask about was just the kind of like we've touched upon the Dead Boys a little bit, but like the kind of what was it like hanging out with the Cramps? Like I just saw Kid Congo Powers last night.
Oh my God!
Yeah, right, he played with Alice Bag at the Beachland. They had this XWCSB benefit thing they did, and like it was incredible, and Kid's awesome. But anyway, like can you tell me about
the Cramps? Okay. Did you guys have a chain out there? Yeah, you must have. Friendlies, which was like an ice cream sandwich place.
Yeah.
Okay. Very family friendly, very Americana. So we're going to play a place in the place in Dover. It's called The Place in Dover with the Cramps, right? And so now, some bands you could just talk to, like all the Dead Boys, they're just totally accessible. They're such good people. The Sid Baders was so sweet, hanging out with us all the time. And there's bands like the Cramps that you probably would keep a step back because they were the Cramps 24/7. They were, they were pretty edgy. They were pretty freaking edgy. But so we go to play, we do our sound check, then we all go to friendlies. And unfortunately, since everything I ever had got robbed in the good old days in New York City, I don't have pictures. But seeing the four Cramps in a booth at friendlies, drinking Fribbles and getting like their food, and the waitress coming over, and would you like something else? Would you like fries with that, Mr. Looks? And that was one of my favorite nights, just looking over going, wow, that is something else, that image right there. It stuck with me. There's many images that stuck with me, but seeing the Cramps and friendlies getting Fribbles and stuff and eating with that frown on their face. And that night they come out and I'm standing right next to the stage and I'm watching Poison Ivy, the guitarist. And I just couldn't take my eyes off her. She was so good. She was just so good. And then years later, in my band, when I had my company, there's all these, okay, the boss, he used to be in a band, he tells us, okay, and they all have tattoos and they're on hardcore bands. So I used to do the thing where dinner and a show with the boss. So I take the kids out. So I take them out. And so I took them to see the Cramps. Now, I don't know what year this was. Maybe it's like 2003 or something. And these kids have all seen it. They thought they'd seen it all. And let me tell you something. These kids with tattoos around their neck and hardcore and all this stuff, the Cramps came out and they'd gotten so tight they were so good. Everyone was like, I've never seen these all kids who just live for rock and roll. I've never seen anything like that. That was a little creative educational when you worked at Fuel Digital, that Jerid, the drummer of the Rousers, would take you to let me show you something, kids. And they all got copies of Please Kill Me. That was the unofficial book for employee manual was Please Kill Me. And Carol got in trouble because she wore she wore a Sex Pistols shirt one day to work. I said, Carol, you're violating the dress code. She says, a dress code of Fuel Digital? I said, yes, get that thing off. And I went down to 8th Street and I got her a Dead Boys shirt, which she cut the sleeves off. So I said, this is the dress code, the Dead Boys, not the Sex Pistols. So Carol still talks about the day I got in trouble for dress code and I got my Dead Boys shirt. So, but the Cramps are awesome. But you couldn't, you see them all around. They always look like that. They always look like, kind of scary and not a lot of smiles from them. But they, especially like in the late, at the end of their career, they sounded magnificent. And, as I said, they opened for the first show of The Clash when I went there. But, they were something else, the Cramps. Oh,
that's incredible.
I miss
so good.
45 years ago. I miss all these, but you got to realize every night was like Woodstock, only with better bands. It was
well, yeah, man. When that was the picking, I can't, and I want to believe it's out there now. We're missing it somewhere, and I do think we are. But that's so sick. That's so sick. Awesome, man. Well, Jerid, thank you so very much for taking all this time to chat with me today. This has been delightful.
As you can tell, I love telling the old stories, so I appreciate someone listening, so my family doesn't have to. Well, if there's any other releases or anything that come out, I'd love to talk again. Oh, I hope, and tell everybody, just buy the Rouser record, Left for Dead.
Left for Dead.
It's really friggin' good. You can get the CD. You can listen for a few tracks on Bandcamp. There's 2 tracks. But there's a very different experience from playing a record, which I just got a record player just to listen to the test pressing. And I realized what a different presentation a record is. It's like I always have all these pop songs popping all over the place, and I go up and down and this and that, and the Clash, and then the Stones, and this and that. When you put in a record, it's actually it's a purposeful, it's they're trying to take you somewhere. And I've been playing records now, like nonstop. And, you can get I got all my stuff. I got like open box. So it's like cost nothing. Cause I thought I was only going to use it for one test pressing. You can get a turntable for next to nothing. You get Daytona. That's out in Ohio. Isn't it Daytona Electrics or something?
Yeah. Yep. Daytona's in Ohio. Ba-boom.
Yeah.
Ohio's
that
all over this story, man.
Yeah. That tube amp, the New York Times said it was the best tube amp. Open box. It glows. It's the most beautiful friggin' thing. It sounds incredible. That amp that you can get open box for like $220. Then you get a turntable open box. You go to, Best Buy open box. You're only out, $700 maybe when you're all done. And you put on the Rouser clear thing, and I'm telling you, you'll put a smile on your face. And every time you feel like, life's kicking you down, you put on the Bumblebee Rock and pick yourself up, man. For sure.
Well, Jerid, thank you, man.
Thank you, my friend.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.